The Great Pyramid has over 2 million stone blocks, and the question is, how did they get there? There are 25 methods we know they used. Ancient engineers moved these massive stones from Egypt to Peru, and by the end, you'll see how they did it. Without modern machines, there's a way to move a 300-ton statue using a path of wet mud. And some think they used sound as a tool. This isn't about magic. It's about a kind of ingenuity we've forgotten. It changes what we think they could do. When you have time and teamwork and determination, that's what innovation looks like. The stones don't speak, but they're here, and their presence says something. It tells you about the world that put them here, a world without steel cables, without hydraulic lifts, a horizon built on muscle, human and animal levers. Ingenuity. When a society decided to raise a monument to the sky or carve a face meant to last forever, it wasn't just construction, it was a statement. A statement of power, a pharaoh's right cut into limestone. It was faith, temples lining up with stars to please the gods, and it was identity, the glue. A shared task that could pull thousands together into one purpose, from Stonehenge out on the plain to the riverbanks where the statues of Memnon stood guard. Cultures separated by oceans, by millennia, they all faced the same puzzle. How do you move the unmovable? That challenge became a crucible for innovation. To see these blocks as just weight is to miss it. They're characters in a story of ambition, and that ambition, pressed by necessity, is what made an engineer look at a muddy bank, a grove of trees, a length of rope, and see not what was there, but what could be. Every method we'll find, none of it was a sudden flash. They were victories, hard-won, from trial and error, the accumulated wisdom of generations that wouldn't take impossible for an answer. A single stone, granite taken from a mountain, made into a wall or a column. The weight is hard to picture, so take that obelisk over 300 tons. That's more than a jumbo jet full of fuel and people. It's 200 cars, all that weight in one block, and then you have to move it, not on a road. Across sand, up from a river, over ground that isn't flat. The problem wasn't just one thing, it was three things all at once. Each one could stop everything. First, friction. How do you get something that heavy to slide or to roll without it just digging into the earth and stopping? Second, the weight itself. How do you hold it up so it doesn't crack or tip over? Because if it tips, it crushes whatever is near it. And third, the people. How do you get hundreds of people, sometimes thousands, to pull together using just ropes and wood to pull as one thing? This wasn't just about strength, it was about control, applying force in a precise way. One wrong pull, a lever in the wrong spot, and that 300-ton block isn't a block anymore. It's an avalanche, it's a disaster. So every method, from the simple ones to the clever ones, each one is an answer to one of these problems. They're solutions to the physics they had to work with, how to beat friction, how to trick the weight, how to make a crowd act like one machine. Every technique is part of that, a workaround not made from stone, made because they had to. The first answer was a wooden sledge that turned a huge problem into something you could actually do. But the real genius wasn't the platform, it was what they put underneath it. To move a giant statue, they didn't fight the ground, they got the ground to help. Archaeologists have the proof, not just in tools but in paintings. There's a scene from an Egyptian tomb, a huge alabaster statue taller than 3 men on a wooden sled. Ropes go forward to teams of workers pulling together. But then you look at the ground in front. A man is standing on the statue's knees, and at his feet, another worker is pouring liquid from a jar onto the path. That wasn't just water for dust, that was the secret. They were making a lubricated highway, wetting the sand or the clay ahead of the sledge. they turned a surface of grinding resistance into a slick, temporary slide. The physics are simple. The sledge spreads the weight over a wider area so it doesn't dig in, but the lubricant, water or wet clay, that's what does the real work. It fills the tiny gaps between the runners and the ground, creates a thin, slippery layer. The solid-on-solid friction, which might need hundreds of people to overcome, becomes fluid friction. The block almost floats. Modern tests show how well this worked. Pulling a heavy sledge over dry sand takes a huge force, but wet that path, and the force needed can drop by half. So a job for 500 people becomes a job for 250. This shows a deep, observational understanding. They saw how mud was slippery. They saw a heavy object slide on a wet riverbank, and they applied that observation on a huge scale. It was a partnership with the environment, using the land's own properties to do the impossible. This was more than a building method. It was a philosophy of motion, written in wood and water and willpower. That wet path worked for a straight run. A prepared track, but over miles, over uneven ground, you can't just keep pouring water. The next idea was to stop moving the stone over the ground and start moving the ground under the stone. That's the logs. You have a huge stone on a wooden sledge, and in front of it you lay down round logs set sideways to the direction you're pulling. You pull, the sledge rolls onto that first log, and as it moves, the log turns, the friction changes. It's not a drag anymore, it's a roll, but the real step was the rhythm. As the sledge rolls off the back of a log, someone takes that free log from behind, carries it to the front, and sets it down again. The stone is always walking on a short track. A treadmill it brings with it. That's likely how they moved the bluestones to Stonehenge. Tons of stone over hundreds of miles from Wales. It came from watching a round thing roll. Seeing that turning a slide into a roll takes less force. It's the same idea in every wheel, a shift from dragging to rolling, but the coordination was huge. You needed a lot of the same kind of timber and a crew working in perfect time. One team on the main ropes, another team just for the log relay, moving them from back to front. One log at the wrong angle and the whole thing jams. It wasn't just moving a stone, it was conducting an orchestra. For longer routes, this idea became something more fixed. The wooden trackway. Instead of moving rollers, they built semi-permanent rails from logs or planks. The stone, on a sledge with grooved runners, would slide inside this wooden channel. That cut friction even more, and it gave a guided path for slopes or precise placement. They think these trackways were used in ancient Mesopotamia for the ziggurats. The investment was massive, miles of timber cut and laid for one task, but that shows the priority. It shows a society planning not for a season, but for centuries. They were building a path for a stone and a roadway for their ambition. Even a smooth roll has its limits. You can't turn a corner with it. You can't nudge a block into a perfect slot. For that, you need a different kind of control. A lever is one of the simplest tools. A strong stick and a solid rock to rest it on. But in the hands of an ancient engineer, it became something precise. Picture a granite block, 10 tons or more, just sitting on the ground. A crew gathers on one side. They don't use ropes to pull it sideways. They use long, sturdy timbers. They slide the tapered end under one edge of the stone. The middle of the timber rests on a smaller rock, a fulcrum. That's the pivot point. On the long end of the lever, several workers push down together. That small force over that long distance becomes a huge lifting force at the short end under the stone. With a coordinated heave, one corner of the block rises. Just a few inches, and in that brief moment when the weight is suspended, another worker darts in. He slides a flat stone into the new gap, or a wooden wedge. Or even a packed handful of sand. They release the lever, the block settles. Now it's sitting a fraction of an inch higher on that one side. They move to the next corner. Lift, insert, settle, then the next. In a slow, patient rhythm, they can walk the entire block forward, or pivot it around, or lift it step by step onto a platform. This was the art of incremental movement. It wasn't fast, but it was exact. It gave them control over the final inches, the final degrees of rotation that rolling couldn't provide. Inside a temple where space was confined, where a lintel over a doorway had to be perfect to the width of a finger, this was the only way. The lever turned the problem of sheer weight into a problem of balance. And balance can be managed. It shows an understanding of physics that a small force with the right advantage can move a mountain, one tiny lift at a time. More than that, it shows the human element. This method required absolute coordination. A chant, a drumbeat, a foreman's call, something to synchronize the push, the insertion, the release. One person out of rhythm and the lever could slip, the block could drop, all that accumulated progress could be lost. It was disciplined teamwork. It transformed individual effort into a single, patient, powerful machine. They weren't just moving stone, they were teaching it to dance, one careful step at a time. Moving a stone across flat ground is one thing, lifting it straight up is another. The pyramids at Giza go up over 450 feet. That's like a 40-story building, and every one of those 2 million blocks had to get to the top. A lever might help you a little, a roller could get you some distance, but for that climb, they had to build their own mountains first. They built ramps. You have to think of a ramp not as a tool, but as a transformation. It turns a vertical lift into a gradual pull. You trade a short fight against gravity for a long, steady walk. It was the ancient freight elevator, and the evidence is still there, right in the landscape. Archaeologists have found the remains, these massive earthen structures. At the Great Pyramid, they've uncovered what looks like the base of a large, straight ramp, running from a quarry to the lower levels, but a single, straight ramp from the ground all the way to the top that would be a monster. To keep the slope gentle enough for men to pull a multi-ton block, say, a slope of 1 in 10, that ramp would have to be over a mile long by the time it reached the peak. The volume of material in the ramp itself could have rivaled the pyramid, so they got creative. They likely used different ramps at different stages. Early on, a broad, straight ramp made of earth and rubble and bricks could service the lower third, a direct highway from the quarry to the site. But as the pyramid grew, that approach became unwieldy. So the design evolved. One theory is the zigzag ramp, a single ramp, but instead of going straight up one face, it switches back and forth across the pyramid sides. Like a road going up a steep mountain, that gave a longer, gentler path, and it used the pyramid's own growing structure as a foundation for one side of the ramp. Then there's the most intriguing idea, the internal spiral ramp. Instead of building an external mountain of earth, they might have built the ramp inside the pyramid as it rose. A corkscrew tunnel ascending within the stone shell, hidden from view. Teams would drag blocks along this dark passage, circling the monument again and again until they reached the right layer. When the pyramid was finished, the ramp was buried forever inside it. That theory solves the problem of the ramp's colossal size, but it brings its own puzzles. Stability, ventilation, the engineering challenge of any ramp was profound. It had to be stable. You're piling thousands of tons of earth and brick at a steep angle. It has to compact, to bind, to not just wash away in the rain or collapse under the constant vibration of heavy loads. They used gypsum mortar, tamped earth, wooden retaining walls to hold it together. It was a massive construction project in its own right, built just to build something else. This was more than a construction method. It was a breathtaking act of project management. It required planning the ramp's route, its material supply, its workforce logistics, all while the primary structure was growing and changing the geometry of the whole site. It transformed the chaotic, vertical challenge of building a mountain into a controlled, horizontal process of delivery. One block, one pull, one step higher on a path they built themselves. The ramp wasn't just how they moved the stones, it was the physical manifestation of their patience. A slow, deliberate walk to the heavens. A ramp is static. It goes from one point to another, but if your stone has to travel not just up but far away across a landscape with no roads, then you need something else. So the ancient engineers looked to the oldest highways on Earth, which are the rivers. Water became the conveyor belt for civilizations along the Nile or the Indus or the rivers of Mesoamerica. The waterway wasn't just a source of life. It was the freight system. This was the fifth method, water-filled channels and barges. They didn't fight the weight, they let the water do the lifting. Think about the physics. On land, every ounce of that granite presses down, creating immense friction. But in water, buoyancy takes over. The water pushes up, counteracting the weight. The block becomes, for all purposes, weightless. The force needed changes from a brutal drag to a gentle push. Gravity's grip is neutralized. That's why the heaviest objects we move today, like oil rigs, are transported by water. The ancients understood this intuitively. They saw logs float, they understood displacement, and they applied it on a monumental scale. The process started at the quarry. Often, they'd choose quarry sites right next to a riverbank. At Aswan in Egypt, the granite quarries sit on the Nile. Workers would carve an obelisk from the bedrock, undercutting it until it was free but still lying in its trench. Then, when the annual flood came, the rising waters would fill the quarry. The stone would simply float free, or they'd dig a canal from the quarry face to the main river. The stone, once on a barge, had a clear, liquid road to its destination. The barges themselves were feats. We're not talking about simple reed boats. These were colossal, purpose-built vessels made from cedar or acacia wood, lashed with rope and sealed with pitch. Herodotus described the barges used for the pyramids. He wrote they were made from short planks like bricks and caulked with papyrus. These barges had to be immensely strong and stable. A tipping obelisk in mid-river would be a catastrophe. They likely built the barge around the stone or winched the block onto a prepared cradle, using the levers and ramps we've already discussed. But the true ingenuity was in the logistics. How do you get a 200-ton stone from land onto a barge without a crane? And how, at the other end, do you get it off again? This is where they transformed the landscape. They didn't just use the river, they sculpted it. At the loading point, they would dig a side canal or basin next to the main river. They'd build a temporary earthen dam to hold the water back. The barge would be floated into this dry basin and secured. Then, using ramps and rollers, the stone would be dragged down into the basin and positioned over the barge. Once ready, they'd breach the dam. The river water would rush in, lifting the barge and the stone together, floating them free. It was a controlled launch. At the destination, they'd reverse the process. They'd guide the barge into another prepared basin or a canal dug right to the site. Then, they'd build a temporary dam or use gates to seal the basin off from the river. Next, they'd slowly drain the water using buckets or siphon channels. As the water level dropped, the barge would settle onto a prepared bed of sand or timber. The stone, now on its cradle, was back on dry land, exactly where they needed it. They could then drag it the final, short distance. This method turned the entire river system into a lock, a liquid elevator. It shows a staggering level of hydrological understanding. They weren't just moving stone. They were performing a slow ballet with the seasons, with the floodwaters, with the flow of the continent. They used time and tide as allies. A stone that would have taken thousands of workers' months to drag overland could glide down river in days, carried on the back of the river itself. It was the most elegant solution because it required the least force, a partnership with nature written in water and wood. A river can only take you so far. Once the stone reached the base of the rising temple, it had to go up. The ramps were one answer, but for a constant lift for getting hundreds of smaller blocks to the masons, there was a simpler tool. They looked to the fields, to the farmers watering their crops, and they saw the solution, the shadoof, a long pole balanced on a crossbeam, a bucket on one end, a heavy counterweight of mud or stone on the other. The farmer pulls the bucket down into the water and the counterweight lifts it full, then he guides it to the ditch. It's a perfect balance of effort. This farm tool became a construction machine, the counterweight lift. On the building site, the scale changed, but the principle stayed the same. They'd erect a sturdy wooden frame. Across the top, they'd mount a long, pivoting beam, the same timber used as a lever. On one end, a rope and hook or a sling to hold a stone block. On the other end, a heavy weight. A basket of rubble or a shaped stone. The crew would pull down on the rope end, loading the stone. Then, with a release, the counterweight would descend. And as it fell, the stone on the other end would rise, smoothly, predictably, with a fraction of the human effort. This wasn't for the 200-ton obelisks. It was for the workhorse blocks, the ones that filled the walls, the ones needing to be lifted 10, 20, 30 feet to the masons. Think of it as an ancient site elevator. It turned a brutal vertical pull into a controlled, balanced motion. The physics are pure genius. The counterweight does most of the work. The human crew just manages the direction. Guides the load, makes small adjustments. It let one team service multiple stations. While one stone was unhooked, another could be loaded. It created a rhythm, a pace that could keep up with a massive project. This adaptation tells us something about those engineers. They weren't in a separate world of monumental technology. Their innovation was connected to everyday life. They saw a farmer lifting water and thought, why not stone? They understood the principle the balance of forces was universal. A tool for sustaining life could be scaled to build a legacy. It shows a mindset that looked for solutions everywhere. There was no hard line between the sacred and the practical. The same simple machine that fed a city could also raise its temples. The counterweight lift embodies a quieter brilliance. It's not about overwhelming force, but about intelligent economy, making the work sustainable day after day for years. It gave the workers a mechanical advantage, saved their strength, prevented injury, allowed for precision. A block swinging from a beam could be nudged into its exact place more easily than one pushed up a ramp. It brought a grace to the grind. In the shadow of the rising pyramid, amid the dust, these pivoting beams would have been in constant motion, like the slow beating of a heart, lifting the building one balanced load at a time. Human strength has its limits, even with machines to help. So the next step was to look beyond people, to the animals they lived with. That's method 7, animal power, oxen, elephants, donkeys. Domestication gave more than food. It gave a living engine, a renewable source of traction that could work for hours, day after day, without tiring like a human crew. It was an early form of mechanization, bringing biological power into the work. Roman records are clear. They used massive ox teams yoked in long lines to haul stone for aqueducts and temples. An ox has steady, immense power. A pair could pull a plow. A team of 20 or 30 hitched to one sledge could move a weight that would need hundreds of men. The rhythm was different, slower but relentless. The sound on a Roman road would have been the groan of wooden yokes, the shuffle of hooves, the calls of the drovers. It amplified human effort by an order of magnitude, but elsewhere, a more remarkable partner was used, the elephant. In ancient India and Southeast Asia, elephants weren't just symbols. They were construction equipment. Their strength is legendary, but the real value was intelligence and dexterity. An ox team pulls straight. An elephant, guided by a mahout, could push, could lift with tusks and trunk, could pivot a stone on a point, nudge it with precision into a tight space. They were living, thinking cranes. Accounts from Indian epics describe elephants dragging colossal stone pillars for temples, or positioning ornate lintels over gateways. It required a deep understanding between human and animal, built on years of training. The Mahout wasn't just a driver, he was a co-engineer, giving complex instructions through taps and commands. The elephant became an extension of the builder's will, but this method had its own requirements. It wasn't just hitching a wild animal. It demanded expertise in husbandry, training, care. These creatures were valuable assets. They needed to be fed, sheltered, kept healthy. Using an elephant was a significant investment, a sign of a project backed by substantial resources, often by a king or temple. It meant a society advanced enough to support not just the workers, but an entire ecosystem for these animal partners. Animal power changed monumental building. It freed human labor for skilled tasks: carving, fitting, surveying. It allowed projects on a scale that would have been logistically impossible with human power alone, just because of the numbers needed. But maybe most importantly, it shows a widening of vision. The solution wasn't always a better tool. Sometimes it was a better partner. They looked at the natural world not just for materials but for motive force. They saw the pull in the ox's shoulders, the push in the elephant's forehead, and they harnessed it. The construction site became a collaboration across species, a shared effort to raise something that would outlast them all. A round column wants to roll, it doesn't want to slide. The builders saw that. They saw the potential in that shape, and they built a machine to work with it. They used a cradle, a wooden frame, a long box just wide enough to hold the stone cylinder. The column sits inside, secured so it can rock. Then a crew works at each end. They lift one side, then the other, a steady rhythm. With each lift and drop, the cradle inches forward, and the column inside it moves with it. The trick was the chocks. As the cradle rocked forward at the peak, a worker would slide in. They'd put a wooden wedge or a flat stone under the leading edge, then the cradle rocks back. And now it rests on that chock. It holds the gain. Rock, insert a chock. Rock, insert another. It was a walking motion, a controlled stumble. It turned this heavy cylinder into something manageable. This was the roller principle, but refined. You weren't moving logs from back to front. You were moving the path itself, one small piece at a time, right under the load. It was perfect for finished columns, for a Greek temple, a Roman forum, stone that couldn't be gouged by rough ground. The cradle protected the surface. The rocking used the column's own round shape. The effort was a fraction of a straight drag. This came from deep observation. They didn't just see the weight. They saw the geometry, the inherent instability, and they used that instability to make it move. This wasn't a general solution. It was a custom tool. For one specific task, it tells us their engineering wasn't just brute force. It was thoughtful adaptation. The shape of the stone began to dictate the shape of the solution. The cradle rocked a column forward, but then you think, what if the ground itself could slide? In colder parts of the world, the answer was already there. It was in the sky. They used ice. When winter came and locked the landscape, builders in places like northern China and Russia, they didn't see an obstacle. They saw a chance. They'd prepare a path of packed earth or wood, and then pour water over it. The freezing night air would do the rest. It turned the path into a hard, glassy track. You'd put a stone block on a wooden sledge and pull it onto this ice road they'd made. The physics of it are very efficient. The friction of wood on ice is incredibly low. A force that might need hundreds of people on dry ground could be handled by just a fraction of that team on ice. The sledge would glide, sometimes with an eerie quiet, across that slick surface. This was engineering by the calendar. It turned a seasonal limit into an advantage. Big transport operations were scheduled for winter when the ground was firm and the ice paths were reliable. It shows a synchronization with the natural world. They weren't fighting their environment, they were listening to it. They understood its rhythms and used those rhythms to set the pace for their work. A project that could take years, its most grueling phase, moving the largest stones, could be confined to just a few efficient winter seasons. This method also shows sophisticated logistics. You can't just pour water anywhere. The path had to be carefully graded, slightly crowned to shed meltwater. It had to be maintained. Teams would likely work through the night, re-wetting the track to keep it smooth as the day's friction wore it down. It was a temporary infrastructure, built and rebuilt with the frost. Think of the scene, the short days, the breath of workers and animals hanging in the air. A focused silence, broken only by the creak of ropes and the smooth whisper of wood on ice. They were harnessing the cold, making the very thing that could stop other work into their greatest asset. This adaptation is a reminder. There was no single, universal secret to moving megaliths. The genius was in the local response. In the desert, they used wet sand. In the forest, they used logs. In the frozen north, they used the winter itself. Each culture looked at what their world offered and saw a solution. The ice path wasn't just a trick. It was a conversation with the climate, a negotiation that turned a challenge into the perfect tool. All that movement, from the quarry to the river to the site, that was just the beginning. The last part was the most delicate. A block could travel 100 miles and fail in the last inch. That moment of placement, that's where the vision became real. They used a 10th method here, pivot and rotate. Imagine a giant stone lintel carved for a doorway. It's on the ground near where it needs to go. It weighs 10 tons. You can't just shove it. The fit has to be exact. The gap might be less than a finger's width. Brute force stops being useful here. It becomes geometry. It becomes touch. The crew would prepare the ground. They'd dig a shallow pit or set a hard stone, a rounded cobble, right under the center of the block. That was the pivot point. Then with long levers, teams worked on opposite sides. One crew would push down on their lever, lifting one corner just a tiny amount. At the same moment, another crew on the opposite side would guide it. They'd use their levers not to lift but to nudge. With that coordinated effort, the whole mass would turn. Just a degree or two on that central pivot. It was a slow dance, a rhythmic dance. Lift, nudge, settle. Check the alignment. Lift, nudge, settle again. Each tiny rotation brought it closer. They might use plumb bobs, simple weights on strings, to check vertical alignment against a mark on the wall. They'd use measuring rods to check the distance from the stone's edge to a fixed point. This process needed a different strength, not the explosive power of 100 pullers, but a sustained, controlled pressure from a few, applied with perfect coordination. It was about feel. The lever men had to sense the stone's resistance, know the moment it began to pivot, and hold it there. A shout, a mistimed push, and the stone could over-rotate. It could fall off its pivot point, crash into the foundation, shatter months of work. The pivot and rotate method shows something. The grand scale, the millions of tons, it all came down to moments of precision. Exquisite precision. The same hands that hauled ropes across miles of desert were now doing a task as careful as a watchmaker's. It shows that ancient engineering wasn't a choice between raw power and intelligence. It was both, seamlessly integrated. The raw power got the stone to the dance floor. The intelligence taught it the final steps. This final placement was probably quiet. Focused, the foreman's calls would be soft, measured. The only sounds, the groan of seasoned timber and the scrape of granite on its pivot stone. This was the point where the architect's lines on papyrus met the reality of rock. And in that meeting, through patience and leverage, they achieved something that still baffles us. A fit so perfect, even now, you can't slide a piece of paper between some of those stones. Steep mountainsides gave you a different kind of power. If the quarry was above the temple, the problem changed. It wasn't about pulling the stone anymore. It was about controlling its fall. That's the downhill slide using gravity. In Petra, carved from cliffs, or Machu Picchu on its terraces, the landscape became the engine. The engineers didn't fight the slope, they choreographed the descent. It started with preparation. They'd carve or clear a pathway down the mountain. This wasn't just a rough trail, it was a prepared chute, a smooth, narrow track of packed earth or stone, sometimes timber, designed to guide the block. They might line it with wet clay to reduce friction, make it a slick, controlled slide. The stone, once freed, would be positioned at the top of this runway. Then, with careful nudges from levers, they'd set it in motion. Gravity did the heavy work. The immense weight of the block, a burden on flat ground, now became the driving force. It would start to slide, gathering momentum, and that momentum was the danger. An uncontrolled stone became a devastating avalanche. It would destroy everything in its path. So the real engineering wasn't in the slide itself, it was in the braking system. Teams of workers were stationed along the chute. They had massive ropes anchored to stout posts or natural rock. As the block accelerated, these teams would take the strain. They wouldn't try to stop it completely. That would snap the ropes. Instead, they applied a steady, resisting tension. A controlled drag to keep the speed manageable. It was a dynamic balance, allowing gravity to pull, but using human strength to govern the pace. Other workers with long poles stood ready. They'd jam levers into the path at key moments to pivot the stone or slow a corner. This method required absolute nerve, perfect communication. The foreman's calls had to carry up and down the slope, coordinating each rope team in sequence. A misjudgment in the chute's angle, a frayed rope, a moment of hesitation, and the whole operation could end in catastrophe. They were playing with forces that could crush them in an instant. Yet they did it. They turned the mountain's greatest threat, its steep, unforgiving drop, into the most efficient transport system possible. It was an opportunistic partnership with the natural world. They looked at a vertical challenge and saw not an obstacle, but a potential energy source. The stone's journey from quarry to site became a single, continuous, controlled release of that stored energy. Engineering as a dialogue with gravity, a negotiation where they let the mountain move the stone, but insisted on dictating every step. Getting a controlled slide down the mountain still needed one last, strong pull at the bottom. To lift a stone onto its base, or drag it that final distance onto the platform, they had to concentrate human strength into a single, constant force. They found the answer in a simple circle, the capstan, a vertical wooden drum fixed into the ground, long bars stuck out from its top. A team of workers would stand around it, each holding a bar. And then they'd start to walk, a steady, endless circle. With each step they pushed against the bars, turning the drum. A thick rope was wound around it. The other end was tied to a sledge or a block of stone. As the drum turned, the rope wound in, and the load, however massive, started to move, inch by deliberate inch. This turned walking, the most basic motion, into a machine. The genius was the multiplication of force. Each person's push on the bar created a turning force, a torque. Because the bar was long, even a small push made a significant twist on the drum. That rotational force transferred directly into the linear pull of the rope. A direct conversion of circular motion into straight-line power. And because the team walked in a continuous loop, the effort could be sustained for hours. One tired worker could drop out, another step in, and the drum never stopped turning. It was relentless. The capstan didn't just amplify strength, it organized it. It systematized the labor. On a chaotic site with hundreds pulling on ropes, coordination was hard. With a capstan, the work became rhythmic, predictable. The pace was set by the circle. It turned a crowd into a single, living engine. This principle was later perfected with medieval cathedrals, where giant treadwheel cranes, powered by men walking inside a huge wheel, lifted stone to dizzying heights. But the seed of that idea was ancient. It was the understanding that continuous, coordinated motion could achieve what sporadic, brute force could not. Think of the sensory scene, the groaning of the thick timber drum, the shuffle of feet on packed earth, the creak of the hemp rope taking the strain. The foreman's call, not a shout but a steady chant to keep the rhythm. There was a meditation to it, a shared physical mantra. Each person's individual contribution was absorbed into the collective turn. They weren't just pulling a stone, they were becoming part of the machine that moved it. This method points to a later stage of engineering thought, moving past improvisation with levers and mud toward designed mechanisms that optimized human effort itself. The capstan didn't just move stone, it choreographed the movement of people. You could also build that patient rhythm right into the path the stone took. That was the walking method. You'd lay down 2 long timber rails parallel, set the stone block on a wooden cradle across them. That changed things. Now you had a firm, level guide. The team would gather at one end, use levers to lift that end just high enough to clear the rail, then a coordinated push, shifting the whole assembly forward a few inches. Set it down, then move to the other end, lift, push, set it down, left, then right, left, then right. The block didn't slide, it walked, a slow, deliberate gait along its wooden road. Each cycle might only gain a hand's width, but each cycle was controlled, stable, repeatable for hours. This method mastered uneven ground. The rails bridged small dips and rises, kept the load level. Perfect for the final approach to a building site where the ground was cluttered or sculpted. The walking method traded speed for precision, security. No risk of a roller shooting out, no chance of a pivot stone sinking. The progress was mechanical, almost metronomic. It reflects a specific mindset. One that accepted a journey of 1,000 miles began with a single step, and was nothing but single steps after that. It's the philosophy of the ant moving a breadcrumb. A belief that any weight, no matter how vast, could be overcome by a system so simple, so repeatable, that time ceased to be a factor. The sound on such a site would have been a series of distinct events. The grunt of the team bearing down on the levers, the scrape of wood on wood as the cradle shifted, the solid thump as it was set down, then a moment of silence as they moved to the other end. A rhythm so ingrained it likely needed few commands. This was engineering as relentless perseverance, built into a simple machine of timber and leverage. The walking method took the stone's full weight, but you could also just make that weight disappear. Sometimes the most direct way was to leave part of the stone behind. At Ollantaytambo in Peru, high in the Andes, the evidence is right there in the stone. Enormous red granite blocks, some over 50 tons. They were brought from a quarry across a valley and a river. But when you look at these finished walls, you see something. The blocks are perfectly fitted, and on their surfaces, often on the top or the sides, there are these protruding knobs. Unfinished bumps of stone. They aren't mistakes. They're the handles of a journey. The idea is the masons at the quarry would rough cut the block, leaving these knobs. The knobs gave the hauling team something to lash ropes around, a grip for levering and dragging. The block would travel to the site in this heavier, oversized state. The extra mass and the knobs made it more stable, easier to handle during the move. Then, once it was dragged into its approximate position on the wall, the final shaping began. The very last step was to chip away those transport knobs, to carve the final smooth face, to reduce the block to its precise, intended size. They were shedding the last vestiges of its journey, lightening it for the final, delicate pivot into place. This method shatters the idea of a linear process. Quarry, then transport, then build. It shows a fluid, integrated operation. The design was adaptable. The exact final size of the block wasn't locked in at the quarry. It was a negotiation with the realities of the route. A difficult slope might mean leaving more extra stone for strength during the move, knowing it would be carved away later. It was a brilliant, pragmatic flexibility. It meant no effort was wasted on perfecting surfaces that would only be scarred by ropes and levers. The finished work was saved for the destination where the masons could work with precision. This approach speaks to a deep logistical intelligence. It treats the stone not as an inert object, but as a changing entity, evolving from a rough mass in the mountain to a precise component in a wall. Each stage of reduction at the quarry during transit on site was a strategic decision, balancing the forces of movement with the demands of the final fit. The stone itself tells this story of transformation. Every smoothed surface, every vestigial knob, whispers about the journey it survived to get there. But the stone itself, maybe it wasn't what we think. Maybe the builders didn't bring the mountain to them. Maybe they recreated it. That's a different idea entirely. Method 15, Geopolymer, artificial stone. The idea is, for some of those perfect blocks, the journey wasn't across the desert. It was from liquid to solid, right in place. That certain stones might not be carved bedrock, but an ancient concrete, cast where it stands. The theory starts with a simple question. If moving a 50-ton block is the hardest part, why move it? You wouldn't. You'd take the raw material, crushed limestone, clay, silica from the sand, mix it with water and an alkali, maybe from plant ash or natron salt. You'd get a thick slurry, build a wooden mold exactly where you needed a block in the wall, pour the slurry in, let it set for days, weeks. The result is a reconstituted stone. It bonds with the blocks beside it. That could explain the paper-thin joints. People who support this point to things. The complete lack of tool marks on some surfaces. Organic fibers and air bubbles found in samples more like a cast material than a carved one, and the logistics become simpler. You're not dragging a pyramid's worth of blocks. You're moving bags of powder and buckets of liquid, a much lighter burden, to mixing stations at the base. Now, this is one of the most debated ideas in alternative archaeology. Mainstream Egyptology largely rejects it. They point to quarrying tools, known quarry sites, the distinct geology of the stones matching distant beds. But the debate, that's where the value is. It forces a question. What do we mean by stone? We see an ancient block and assume it's always been that single piece of earth. But advanced materials science shows stone can be a starting point, not an end point. The Romans later perfected concrete. Could an earlier civilization have found a precursor? Whether the theory holds or not, it stretches the imagination. It asks if their mastery wasn't just about moving the world but remaking it. The knowledge of how to turn powder into rock, that's a different alchemy. Not the transport of mass, but the transformation of matter, a secret not in the path but in the substance. And if that knowledge was lost, it whispers of a sophistication that vanishes not with a crash but with a silence, leaving behind stones that guard their own origin. A stone on the ground is just a stone, but once you lift it, you have a problem. You have to keep it there. That's what the temporary structure is for. Method 16 is cribbing, a framework of timber. It turned a slow lift into a safe ascent. Think of a heavy block on the ground. You need to raise it 5 or 6 feet to set it on a wall. Levers can lift a corner, but you can't hold it with muscle, so you build a wooden box around it. Not fancy, sturdy beams, squared and notched, stacked crisscross, like a log cabin. That's the crib. It's strong, it's stable, and it's adjustable. The process was a careful dance. Lever and lumber. First, lever one side up an inch or two. Slide a flat plank into that gap, or a stone chock. Release the lever. The block rests on that first support. Then move to the opposite side. Lift, insert another plank. Bit by bit, you walk the stone up until there's enough clearance to slide the first layer of timber crib underneath. The stone settles onto that new platform, a stronger platform. Now the real work. Build the crib higher. Add a second layer of beams perpendicular to the first, locking the structure together. Once that layer is secure, repeat the levering. Lift the stone a few more inches. Insert temporary supports. Then slide in another permanent layer of cribbing beneath it. Layer by layer, the crib grows upward and the stone rises with it, always cradled in a cage of wood. This was a masterclass in provisional support. The crib wasn't just holding weight. It was creating a stable workspace. It prevented catastrophic slips. If a lever failed, the stone only dropped an inch onto the solid timber below, not all the way to the ground. It protected the workers and it protected the stone from a shattering fall. The genius is in the reusability, the flexibility. Once the stone was maneuvered onto its permanent spot, the crib could be disassembled. From the bottom up, the same timbers carried to the next block, and the next, a mobile, adjustable scaffold for the entire project. It shows an engineering mindset that thought in phases. Movement wasn't just the journey from quarry to site. It was every single vertical inch of that journey. To place a stone with precision, you first had to invent the staircase it would climb. This speaks to a profound patience. There was no rush. Each layer of timber was a small, guaranteed victory, a step secured before the next was attempted. In the shadow of a rising temple, these wooden frameworks would have been everywhere, temporary skeletons holding up the permanent bones of stone. It's a forgotten truth. The most enduring monuments were often built on a foundation of humble, reusable wood. All that wood and rope and leverage, it was just material. It sat there. It only became a machine when human hands took hold. So the 17th method, it wasn't built from timber. It was built from people, from social structure. A machine made of men. The principle of leverage is one kind of physics. The principle of coordination, that's another. To shift a mountain of rock, you first had to assemble a mountain of workers. And that may have been the highest form of engineering. Consider the size of it. A project like the Great Pyramid at its height might have needed 20,000 people. And these weren't just a faceless crowd. This was a small society with its own ranks and special roles. You had the quarrymen. They knew how to read the stone, where to cut to find the good grain. The transporters, they were experts with ropes and sledges. They understood the rhythm of a haul. The ramp builders, they were always maintaining those earthen roads, shoring them up. The setters, they were the final craftsmen with their levers and their plumb lines, fitting a block into a wall. And behind them, all the support. The bakers, the potters, the woodworkers, the doctors, the record keepers. This wasn't disorder, it was an orchestration, and it was directed by a clear line of authority. Overseers, foremen, crew bosses. We've found inscriptions from the worker towns, names of crews with titles like the Vigorous Gang or the Enduring Gang. They worked in shifts probably based on the seasons, bursts of work and then time to rest. The work was difficult, of course, but what we find tells a different story than the old tales. These weren't slaves under a whip. Excavations at Giza show bakeries that could make thousands of loaves each day. They show housing barracks, medical sites where fractures were treated and healed. Evidence of a diet that included fish and meat. These were skilled workers. They were fed. They were housed. They were likely farmers who came to work on the monument when the Nile flooded their fields, when their labor was free for the state. And in return, they got provisions, shelter, and probably a feeling of taking part in something national, something sacred. This changes how we see these structures. The pyramids weren't just a king's tomb. They were the engine of a civilization. They created purpose, they created jobs, they created social unity. That shared, colossal task became the bond that held the society together. It gave a farmer from some far-off village a place in something everlasting. His name might not be carved, but his effort is in that mountain. So the real brilliance, it wasn't just in moving a stone. It was in moving 10,000 people, in motivating them, sheltering them, feeding them, arranging their work across generations. The foreman calling the rhythm for a capstan team, the scribe counting limestone blocks from Tura, the quartermaster filling the water skins. They were all components of the machine. The most vital resource wasn't the copper tool or the wooden lever. It was the community, organized, motivated, a community that could look at an impossible job and, through pure coordinated will, make it a permanent part of the world. What they built wasn't just a heap of stone. It was their collective agreement, their shared intention, made solid, made permanent. That machine of men ran on something more than food and shelter. The 18th method wasn't a tool you could hold. It was belief, a shared conviction that this work served a purpose far beyond the person, that a temple honored the gods, that a tomb secured eternal life, that a monument aligned the human world with the cosmos. This psychological motivation was the fuel for decades of labor. It turned endurance from a hardship into a sacred duty. Think of the sound on that site. It wasn't just the groan of ropes, there would have been chanting. Rhythmic work, songs, prayers, the steady beat of a drum to keep the hauling pace. Music and ritual weren't distractions. They were tools for coordination and morale. They synchronized movement, turning 100 separate pulls into one unified heave. They lifted the spirit when the body ached, a sense of participating in a divine project, of building a stairway for a pharaoh to join the stars. That conviction could carry a person through a lifetime of work. No whip could ever match that kind of internal drive. This reminds us that for the ancient mind, the spiritual and the practical were not separate realms. They were woven together. The precision of the stone's alignment wasn't just good engineering. It was a religious act ensuring the structure would function in the celestial order. The act of dragging a block became a form of devotion. Faith provided the unwavering will that made the engineering possible. It blended a transcendent purpose with the gritty, daily process. The foreman's call wasn't just a command, it was an invocation. The perfectly fitted joint wasn't just stability, it was a seal against chaos. This intangible force is perhaps the hardest for us to grasp today. We see the stones and calculate the man-hours, but we might miss the heart-hours, the collective dream that made thousands accept blistered hands and weary backs, not as oppression but as offering. Their legacy isn't just in the monuments that stand, but in the invisible cathedral of shared purpose they built first, in their minds and in their community. That was the true foundation. Everything else was built upon it. Failure wasn't the end, it was a teacher. The 19th method wasn't a tool, it was the whole mindset. Trial and error, iterative design. Those engineers were practical scientists. Before they moved a 200-ton obelisk, they would have tested the idea. On a smaller scale, a model sledge, different rope configurations on a 1-ton block, a short section of ramp to see how it settled. They observed what worked. And what broke. A shattered timber under a test weight taught them about grain, stress points. A collapsed earthen ramp taught them about soil, compaction, and drainage. Each failure was a lesson, written in splintered wood and slumped earth, and each lesson folded into the next design. This was the empirical method. Observe a problem. Hypothesize a solution, build a test, see the result, adapt. There were no textbooks. The knowledge was earned, written in calluses and corrected mistakes. That explains the regional variations. In Egypt, they perfected the wet sand sled. In Peru, the knotted rope and gravel bed. Each culture's solutions were shaped by local materials. Their terrain, the accumulated results of generations of experiments. The legacy isn't a vault of perfect blueprints, it's a dynamic story of adaptation. A process. The pyramid at Madam shows clear signs of a redesigned pathway through, evidence of learning in real time. They didn't get it perfect on the first try. They got it right through persistence. This iterative process built something more valuable than any monument, a cumulative body of knowledge. A foreman would teach his son not just how to tie a knot, but why this knot. For this stone on this slope, the wisdom of a collapsed ramp in the time of one pharaoh became the foundation for a successful one in the next. It transforms how we see these achievements. They weren't the product of a sudden revelation. They were the hard-won summit of a long climb, built step by step, failure by correction, stone by stone. A universal principle can be said 1,000 ways. The 20th method was a philosophy, adaptation. Engineers didn't have a global supply chain, they had a forest. A riverbank, a mountain. Their genius was in seeing what was already there. In forested places like ancient Cambodia, the lever wasn't just a stick. It was a specific hardwood, chosen for its grain, cut to a length that gave it spring. The rope wasn't generic, it was woven from local plants, hemp, flax, sisal, or twisted leather, each with its own strength, understood through generations. In Egypt, large timber was scarce. They used acacia, sycamore, fig. They laminated shorter pieces to make the long sledges they needed. Their chisels were copper because that was the metal they had. It dulled quickly against granite, so they adapted. They sharpened and re-sharpened. They used abrasives, quartz sand, to grind the stone rather than cut it. So the principles leverage, friction were always filtered through a local lens. Moving a megalith in the jungles of Southeast Asia looked different from moving one on the plains of Mesopotamia. Not because the people were different, because the materials were. The principle of the roller was universal, but in a land of giant cedars, the rollers were thick and long. In a land of palms, they might be bundled reeds. The ramp's concept was global, but its material was local, earth and rubble in one place, baked mud bricks in another. This resourcefulness proves something. Ingenuity is a human constant, but its expression is a conversation with a specific place. A culture's monumental architecture became a portrait of its ecosystem. You can read the landscape in the tools. The absence of a material forced an innovation. No strong timber for levers. Then maybe they used more ropes. More people, they developed sophisticated knotting, team coordination. No local stone soft enough for quarrying. They might have perfected fire setting. Heating the rock face, then dousing it with water to make it crack. This local adaptation shatters an idea. The idea of a lost, superior technology from some advanced ancestor. It argues for a different narrative. That innovation is emergent. It rises from need, from observation of the local world, from relentless experimentation. The methods weren't imported. They were grown like a crop from the soil of necessity, from the seeds of basic physical truth. The perfect solution wasn't a secret from afar. It was the one that used the materials at hand in the most intelligent way. That makes their achievements more remarkable. They weren't following a manual. They were writing it with the vocabulary their environment provided. The legacy isn't just in the stones they moved, it's in the message that no matter where you are, with enough observation and will, the world itself contains the tools to reshape it. The sky was a clock, a calendar, a map, and for the ancient engineer it was a project manager. The movement of stones was choreographed to a celestial rhythm. Engineering in harmony with time itself, they saw the universe had a schedule, and the most efficient plan moved with it. The annual flood of the Nile is the clearest example. It wasn't a disaster to endure, it was a season to use. The river would rise, turning the landscape into a network of liquid highways. That was the signal. The time to move the heaviest stones from the Aswan quarries down to the valley, down to the pyramid sites. By timing the transport with the flood, they turned a logistical nightmare into a smooth, buoyant journey. The water did the lifting, the current gave a gentle push, and the stone arrived precisely when the land was soft and ready for the next phase. That required profound foresight. Quarrying had to be finished months in advance, so the blocks were ready to float when the waters came. It meant reading the signs, the height of the star Sirius before dawn, the behavior of animals, to predict the flood's arrival. Their calendar wasn't just for planting crops, it was for moving mountains. This synchronization extended to the workforce. These were largely farming societies. The great projects were scheduled for the inundation season when the fields were underwater and the farmer's labor was available. It was a sustainable cycle. The people fed the land fed the people, and in the season of rest for the earth, the people built for eternity. The rhythm of sowing and harvesting dictated the rhythm of quarrying and setting stone. Human energy was directed where it was most abundant, a flow that sustained both the monument and the society building it, but the alignment went deeper than logistics. It was symbolic. A temple gateway aligned to the rising sun on the equinox wasn't just an architectural feat, it was a statement. The building was part of the cosmic order. Dragging a stone into place on a day sacred to a god transformed physical labor into a ritual. The timing of the work infused it with meaning. This reveals a worldview with no separation between the practical and the sacred. Between science and spirit, to build something eternal, you had to weave it into the fabric of time, into the return of the seasons, the path of the stars, the pulse of the river. The monument didn't just occupy space, it occupied a moment in the eternal cycle, commemorating the harmony between human ambition and the turning of the world. The rhythm of a drumbeat could coordinate the pull of a rope, but rhythm itself, could it become a physical tool? Beyond just coordinating muscle, some researchers have looked at a more elusive idea. That sound vibration might have been used to directly affect the stone. This is the 20-second method, a theory that sits on the border of legend and lost science. Sometimes it's called acoustic levitation. The idea is that specific, powerful sound frequencies could create a standing wave, a stable pattern of pressure in the air. And within that pattern, it's theorized an object could be suspended, or at least made to seem lighter, its friction with the ground dramatically reduced. Now, it has to be said plainly, there's no definitive archaeological evidence that ancient engineers levitated multi-ton blocks with sound. Mainstream archaeology views these claims with deep skepticism. The practical energy required to generate those frequencies with ancient technology seems, to our understanding, implausible for moving megaliths, and yet the idea persists. Not as a proven fact, but as a question. Why does it persist? Because the connection between sound, rhythm, and matter isn't pure fantasy. We know rhythm was vital. Work chants, sea shanties, they didn't just lift spirits, they synchronized movement. They turned individual effort into a single, efficient pulse. That synchronization alone could make a task feel easier. Reducing wasted energy, that's a form of harnessing vibration just at the human scale. Then there are the cultural hints. Myths from various traditions speak of stones being moved by song. By the chants of priests, by the blowing of sacred trumpets. These are often dismissed as metaphor. But what if they're a distant echo of an observed principle? A principle not of magic, but of a physics they could use without being able to explain it in our terms. Modern science offers a glimpse of why this isn't entirely outlandish. We know sound can affect matter. High-intensity ultrasound is used in industry to manipulate tiny particles in a liquid. It's called acoustic trapping. Certain resonant frequencies can cause sand to form intricate patterns on a vibrating plate. These are demonstrations of sound imposing order, of vibration altering the behavior of solid materials. So the speculative question becomes this: could ancient builders have stumbled upon a resonant frequency for a specific type of stone, a rhythm produced by drums or chanting that matched the natural vibration of the granite? Not to make it float, but to momentarily change its interaction with the earth, to reduce the grip of friction, just as wet sand does, but through vibration instead of liquid. It's a staggering thought. This theory, fringe as it is, pushes us to reconsider the boundaries of their knowledge. It asks if their understanding of harmony extended beyond music and into the fabric of materials. Did they see the world as fundamentally vibrational, and learn to speak to stone in a language of rhythm we've since forgotten? Whether it was a practical tool or a profound philosophical concept, it points to a central theme. Their engineering wasn't just about overcoming nature with force. It was about listening to it, finding the hidden rhythms in wood, in rope, in stone itself, and then joining in. Perhaps the greatest tool wasn't something they built, it was a frequency they learned to hear. Their work with sound was speculative, but their other discoveries are still here. You see it in a construction crane. That's the direct descendant of the ancient counterweight lift, a pivoting beam balanced by a heavy weight. It's the same principle, just scaled up with steel and hydraulics. A crane is a lever with a motor, and that proves the idea wasn't just effective, it was fundamental. Good physics is permanent, or a conveyor belt in a factory or an airport. It's a powered, endless version of the roller system. Instead of men moving logs from back to front, a motor turns a series of cylinders. It creates a continuous, low-friction path. The problem of moving heavy things efficiently was solved a long time ago by understanding that rolling beats sliding. We just added electricity. Even their social machine has a modern counterpart. That complex coordination of 20,000 workers with foremen, scribes, supply lines. It's mirrored in every major construction project today. We use software for scheduling now, for communication. But the core challenge is the same. How do you organize thousands of people with different skills toward a single, colossal goal? The ancient overseers were the first project managers. Their tools were vocal commands, tally marks on papyrus, but their goal was the same as a modern site supervisor with a digital tablet, to synchronize human effort into a coherent force. That's the true legacy. It isn't locked in the past, it's active. When engineers today design a way to move a historic building, they start with the same principles. They might use hydraulic jacks instead of levers, Teflon pads instead of wet clay, but the intellectual lineage is unbroken. They are reducing friction. They are distributing weight. They are choreographing teams. The problems of physics and human collaboration haven't changed. Only our tools have. Studying these ancient methods does more than satisfy curiosity. It reconnects us with the bedrock of innovation. It reminds us that before microchips, before composite materials, there was observation, there was trial and error. There was the understanding that a small force, applied with intelligence and patience, can move a mountain. Their work was the first chapter in a very long book. A book we are still writing. The story of human ingenuity isn't a series of disconnected leaps. It's a continuous conversation across time. We stand on the ramps they built, using the leverage they mastered, guided by the same stars they followed. Their stones are a message, a reminder that the most advanced technology often works in harmony with the simplest truths. The most important method might not be about moving stone. It's about moving how we see it. With these 23 proven techniques, you get a kind of lens. You can look at the big claims, lost civilizations, vanished tech, even alien builders, and just ask a simple thing. Is this necessary? Does the evidence really point beyond the stars when the tools and the ingenuity are right here in the archaeology written in the stones? The so-called mystery of the megaliths often falls apart on one point. We keep underestimating three things: cumulative knowledge, the sheer scale of time, and the force of organized human effort. A single lifetime feels short to us. We think in years, but these projects spanned generations. Knowledge wasn't lost between them. It was handed down, refined, built upon. A technique a grandfather perfected became the foundation for his grandson's innovation. What looks like an impossible leap to us was, for them, a slow walk of centuries. Take the precision of the stone fitting. It's often called proof of a technology we can't grasp, but we've seen the methods: the pivot and rotate, the walking cradle, the patient levering. Those are the technologies of comprehension. They come from obsessive care, from trial and error on 1,000 blocks before the final one was set. It's not magic. Its craftsmanship raised to an art by a culture that saw perfection as a spiritual act. The alien theory, in a way, does a deep disservice. It takes their greatest achievements, the product of their observation and sweat and genius, and gives the credit to some outside, unknowable force. It strips their agency. It says you could not have done this, but the evidence says otherwise. They did do it with levers and logs, with mud and muscle. With an understanding of their world that was different from ours, but no less intelligent. When you replace fantasy with this documented reality, you don't lose wonder. You get a deeper kind. The wonder isn't about who built it anymore, but how they did it as human beings. It's the wonder of shared purpose, of problem solving on a civilizational scale, of leaving a mark so permanent that millennia later, we're still trying to grasp the full weight of their will. That story, human ingenuity facing a monumental challenge, is more compelling than any fiction. It connects us to them, not as passive recipients of some alien gift, but as heirs to the same relentless creative spirit. The real legacy isn't a puzzle to solve by looking up. It's a testament to understand by looking around at the earth, at the sky, at what people together can actually do. The final method isn't something you find carved somewhere. It's what you see when you look at all the others together. It's the one thing tying them all together. Just physics, really, but seen with a kind of masterful vision. They didn't have machines, they had levers, rollers, ramps, floats, basic truths about force and motion, learned from generations of hands-on work. Their genius wasn't about discovering new laws. It was seeing the staggering potential inside the old ones and having the collective will to scale that potential up to a size that could alter the world. Think of it like this: a child with a stick can lift a rock. That's leverage. An ancient engineer looked at that same idea and asked, what if the stick was a 200-foot log? What if the rock was a 200-ton block? And what if we had 400 people to push? They took a simple truth and stretched it, patiently, until it could move a mountain. They did the same with buoyancy. A reed floats, so a stone on a barge can be weightless, and with friction, mud is slippery, so you can make the desert itself a slide. Every method is really about that scaling up. It was a shift in perspective, from what a tool can do to what a civilization can make it do. That reveals the real innovation. It was combinatorial. They almost never used just one method. A stone's journey was a symphony of techniques, quarried with levers and wedges, dragged on a sledge over wet sand, rolled onto a barge when the river flooded, guided up a zigzagging ramp of earth, finally pivoted into place with a chanted rhythm. The seamless integration of these simple tools, that's where the magic happened. It was logistics, the art of sequencing basic physics into one grand, continuous process. Their mastery came down to three things. First, a deep, intuitive understanding of their environment. Hard won, they knew their materials: the spring in acacia wood, the grip of hemp rope, the slide of wet clay. Second, an unparalleled capacity for adaptation. No tall timber, use more ropes. No river nearby, build a canal. They listened to the land and used what it offered. And third, a generational persistence we can barely imagine. They thought in lifetimes, not fiscal years. A project lasting 100 years wasn't a planning failure. It was the plan. So the 25th method is a meta-method. The art of seeing potential. It's looking at a puddle and seeing a hydraulic lift, looking at a hill and seeing a ramp, looking at a crowd and seeing a living engine. That changes the monuments. They're not just mysterious relics. They're something more profound. They're physical proof of a conversation. A long, patient conversation between human ingenuity and the immutable rules of the world. The stones are silent, but they speak volumes. They tell us the greatest forces we can harness aren't hidden in lost technology. They're right here, in the principles of the world around us. Waiting for the vision to apply them. The legacy isn't a secret to uncover. It's an invitation to look at the simple, the basic, the fundamental, and to see within it the power to shape reality. The real engineering wasn't about one technique, it was the orchestration. Each method was a note, and a master project was the symphony, a pyramid, a temple. These weren't built by one trick. They were built by a sequenced workflow of many. The genius was knowing which tool to use and when to turn raw stone into perfect geometry. Take a single casing stone for the Great Pyramid. It started in the Tura quarries across the Nile. Quarrymen used copper chisels and wooden wedges, swelling with water, to free it from the bedrock. That was the first technique. Then they loaded it onto a wooden sledge using ropes and levers. That was the second. They dragged that sledge along a path constantly wetted by a crew with water jars. That's the third method. The wet sand reduced friction, making the haul to the river possible. At the river, they waited for the inundation. When the Nile rose, they guided the sledge into a prepared basin where a barge was waiting. They used controlled flooding to float the barge under the stone. That's method 4, water transport. On the water, the stone was nearly weightless. The current and a team of paddlers carried it down river to the pyramid's harbor. That was the long-distance solution. At the harbor, the process reversed. They guided the barge into another basin, sealed it off, and drained the water. The barge settled, and the stone was back on land, but it was still at ground level. The pyramid was rising hundreds of feet into the air, so the ramp systems took over. Crews dragged the sledge onto a massive earthen ramp, method 5. This turned the vertical lift into a long, gradual, horizontal pull. Teams of workers hauled it up this engineered mountain. As the pyramid grew taller, the ramps evolved. Maybe a straight ramp became a zigzag or an internal spiral, but the principle held: convert the climb into a walk. Once the stone reached the correct tier, the work became delicate. The rough drag was over. Now, using levers and pivot stones method 6, crews nudged the block into its exact position. They walked it forward or used counterweight lifts to raise it the last few feet. The final placement, that paper-thin joint, was achieved with patient micro-adjustments using those same levers. This seamless flow from one method to another reveals a staggering level of project management. It was a logistical ballet. The quarrying schedule had to sync with the flooding of the Nile. The ramp construction had to keep pace with the pyramid's ascent. The workforce had to be divided into specialized teams: quarrymen, transporters, ramp builders, setters. The materials, timber, rope, water, food, all had to flow to the right place at the right time. This synthesis changes the view. We move from admiring isolated cleverness to understanding a cohesive, operational strategy. The wet sand sled wasn't just for moving stones. It was the first leg of a relay. The ramp wasn't just a slope, it was the permanent conveyor belt of the site. The lever wasn't just for prying, it was the final calibration tool. They understood that no single method could do it all. Water transport is useless for vertical lift. A ramp is inefficient for long-distance travel. A lever cannot move a block miles. But together, in a planned sequence, they became an unstoppable system. Each technique solved a specific phase of the problem, handing the stone off to the next like a baton in a race. This systematic brilliance is the quiet truth behind the monuments. The stones are not just proof of strength. They are fossils of a process that combined deep environmental knowledge with flawless logistics and an unwavering collective will. The real monument, in a way, was not the finished pyramid. It was the invisible, perfectly coordinated machine that built it, a machine made of earth, water, wood, and human spirit. We started with a question at the base of a pyramid, a question about weight and distance and how it could even be possible, and we didn't end with one magical answer. We ended with 25. They were in the mud on a sled track, in the grain of a wooden roller, in the breath of 1,000 people pulling together. Each method, the wet sand, the water channel, the lever, the capstan, it's all part of a bigger truth. That truth takes apart the myth of impossibility. And it rebuilds it block by block into a monument to human ingenuity. Those builders weren't primitive, they were pioneers. Their legacy isn't in some lost library. It's in stone all over the planet, from Salisbury Plain to the Andes. They looked at the world with a deep curiosity. They saw a slide in the mud, a roll in a log, a lift in a balanced beam, and they had the vision and the collective will to scale those observations up to a size that could shape the horizon. Their biggest lesson is that constraints don't limit genius. They define it: scarcity of material, the laws of physics, the scale of the task. Those weren't walls, they were the materials they built their solutions from. So next time you stand before an ancient wonder, you can see more than a mystery. You can see the proof. In every fitted joint, there's the patience of the lever. In every towering wall, the long climb of the ramp. In every stone that traveled 100 miles, the silent support of the river. These structures are conversations, frozen in time, a long dialogue between human creativity and the unwavering rules of the natural world. They tell us that with deep knowledge, cooperation, and determination, humanity can move mountains.